So here are all the answers to the multiple choice questions on the micro mock that you did in February. So first question, a question on the determinants of price elasticity of supply, and as soon as you read that you need to be thinking about, well, what are the factors that affect PES? So first thing I think is availability of the factors of production, the ability to store the product, time, but also is there any spare capacity in the market? And so that's or for the firm itself, that's the answer there. Most common incorrect answer was price of good X. Now the price determines the quantity supplied. So if you've got a supply curve here, high price, high quantity supplied, low price, low quantity supplied, but that's not what the question is asking, which is about PES. The price elasticity of demand of good X, well, it determines lots of other things, so that would be a very inelastic demand curve. We could have a very elastic demand curve there, but that doesn't actually affect the PES, the elasticity of supply. So whether supply is inelastic there, I'm showing, or elastic. And total production of good X is just about, well, I suppose we need demand to intersect it. At what point are we producing at? But that's not something that determines the steepness of that gradient. C is the only one there that does that. Okay, next question, composite demand. These are just definitions that you're going to have to learn. So the answer to this one was A. Composite, I always think of composite demand in reference to the Human Development Index, because that's a composite measure of human development, and basically all it means is that it's a few different things taken into account when they're looking at it. So they look at education, they look at health, and they also look at GDP as well. So that helps me remember that it's composite demand is just where you're looking at the total demand for a particular product. So one example could be milk. Milk can make cheese, and it can make butter, and it can make lots of other products as well, and that's the one example we've used in class. Lots of people put B for this question, but that's actually derived demand. So C would be complements, and D is, or C complements or joint demand, and D is a substitute for another good, so competitive demand there. This one was a really hard question that not many people got right, and you had to read through the questions really, really carefully. So the answer to this one was... it was, I have to work it out myself now. So we can see that if we go through them in order, wheat has fallen in price. So if the part A says if it's price elastic, the earnings of wheat producers will have decreased, but that can't be right, because if something's price elastic and the price drops, that should increase revenue. Whereas D says total revenue from the sale of maize will have fallen between years 1 and 2 if demand for the product is price inelastic, and we can see there that price is falling from 170 to 130. And if it is price elastic, that will mean a decrease in revenue there. B, the trend will have encouraged producers to increase output. Well, no, because the trend is a downward pressure on prices, or sorry, not downward pressure on prices, but actually a fall in prices. So why would producers increase output? And then C, price elasticity of demand is lowest for oats. Well, we can't tell that from the data here. Okay, which one of the most following is most likely to lead to improvements in labour productivity? This was a really hard question as well, because most people didn't think of capital-intensive methods as increasing, labour productivity. But remember, labour productivity is the output divided by number of workers or employees. So if you have better machinery, then you're going to increase your output, this equation on top, without actually changing the number on the bottom, so that would increase your productivity. Increasing the supply of labour was the most common incorrect answer, but what all that does is increase the number of workers, so the part on the bottom, so you're actually dividing your output by a larger number, which actually decreases your labour productivity. Okay, so this one, lots of people got this wrong just because they didn't read the question correctly, and I think if they read the question again, they'd know what to do. So an increase in the price from P1 to P2 was most likely the result of, now because two curves are moving, we've got demand moving inwards, as you can see there, that's a badly drawn arrow, and we've got supply moving inwards. We know that it's going to be two things. So A, an increase in milk production costs, okay, so that would actually move supply inwards. And then a decrease in the price of a complementary good to milk. Okay, so it can't be that one because that would move demand outwards because you take into account the total price of milk and the complementary products as well when you're buying that. Okay, so successful advertising campaign for a milk substitute. So yep, that would move demand inwards, and a tax on milk. Yep, that would move demand inward. Supply inwards as well. So it has to be B there. Most people put A because they just didn't read the questions though. Which one of the following is a factor of production? Land. It's the only one here that's a factor of production. Table elasticities, all other things being equal. This is cross price elasticity of demand, by the way. You need to make sure that you read what type of elasticity it is because the figures are going to mean different things. So we know these are all positive numbers, so we know we've got substitutes here. And all other things being equal, which one of the following companies is most likely to possess the greatest market power? So the answer is going to be D, and I've written over these so you can't see very clearly, but it's D because when the price for closest substitute changes, you see the least change in the quantity demanded of D there because it's got the actual smallest number. So the closer you are to 0 for any number that's for an XED number, the less this product has close substitutes. Sorry, that wasn't very well explained. So the larger the number, the stronger the relationship between the two products that you're looking at, and the closer towards 0 that you are, the weaker the relationship. And if you get to 0, there's no relationship between the two products. So we can see that it would mean that company D, with whatever the closest substitute you're looking at, has a very weak relationship with them, which suggests that it has very strong market power, so maybe branding or something like that. Okay, which one of the following is most likely to be a source of monopoly power? Okay, most people circled A for this one, but it wasn't. I shouldn't do that. It wasn't actually A. It was the granting of patents to pharmaceutical company for a newly developed drug, and this is a barrier to entry. B to E, a barrier to entry. So A is an example of an economy of scale. B is a problem of being a monopoly, and D just really wouldn't have an impact on the market because the merger of two small firms in a large industry, they wouldn't be very significant because it's in a really large industry and they're small firms. So it's only C that is actually a barrier to entry. So would be a source of monopoly power. That's what it means when it's talking about source of monopoly power, barriers to entry. So the price of cocoa more than doubled over an 18-month period as a result of increased buying on world markets. Such a development in the cocoa market could be shown on a supply and demand diagram by a shift of demand curve to the right. Most people got this right here. Some people said that it was a movement, but the thing is, if we just draw a diagram, we know that the supply, demand, and your equilibrium's there. We know that the price has increased, so either that would have had to have been caused by supply shifting inwards, or it has to be caused by demand shifting outwards. Now, read the case study and you see we've got a price increasing, but increased buying. So there's the clue there that it's actually demand shifting outwards, which causes a movement along the supply curve, but that's not one of the options there. The role of prices in the market economy is to allocate scarce resources. This is just one of those key definitions that you need to learn. So we look at that, the distribution of income, when we look at market failure. So this is one of the problems of a free market mechanism. Determine the elasticity of demand curves. No. You'd have to do your equation to work out that. So I suppose you'd have to have prices in the first place to be able to work it out, but that's not the answer to this. And this one's an interesting one. This is I suppose B was the most common wrong answer. This one's coming up in a later question actually, but it's to do with the point of view that you're looking at. Here we've got the role of prices in an economy is to. So you just have to remember that definition. Which one of the following is true for a normal good which has a downward sloping demand curve? So a normal good which has downward sloping demand curve looks like that. D is downward sloping, and because it's downward sloping, we know that price elasticity of demand should always be negative. It's only positive when it's one of those products where price increases causes more demand, so Veblen goods, but it's not usual that we look at those in A-level economics. And then income elasticity of demand. For a normal good, you should know that it has to be positive, so we've got to pick the one, I've already done it there, pick the one that's got positive and then negative, so it's B. A shift to the left of a country's production possibility frontier. So shift to the left like that, reflects a fall in a country's productive capacity. So whereas before they'd be able to produce at this point, now they can only produce at this point. So underutilisation of a country's scarce resources, this was another common one. That would just look like a cross that's within the curve, to the left of the curve. And a rise in a country's level of productivity would be the cross moving to a point on the curve. Okay, market for fresh fish, and we can see that supply has moved inwards, so what's caused that? And it's A, because that's going to increase the cost of production. B would actually move supply outwards. C, an increase in preference for fresh fish by the consumer, that would move demand outwards, and a fall in the price of frozen fish. That would cause a movement along supply or demand, but we'd need to know what had caused that to be able to know whether it was supply and demand that was causing that. A fall in supply moving outwards would cause a fall in the price of frozen fish, or demand moving inwards would cause that, but you'd need to tell. Diseconomies of scale might arise, right? Well, A is an economy of scale because we've got lower average cost there. So it is actually B, decision making by management becomes more difficult. C again is what happens with economies of scale, and D is an economy of scale as well. So it's really important to read what's written. Diagram, this is one that's come up in class before. Actually, when I saw this for the first time, I thought it was a really difficult question as well. So which point, A, B, C or D, corresponds to a situation whereby the economy could increase production of consumer goods without foregoing the production of capital goods? So the only one where you can actually increase and produce more consumer goods without foregoing capital goods is the movement from A to B. So if you were doing B, you could move to C, but you'd actually be foregoing some of the capital goods. If you move from D to either B or C, again, you get the same situation. If you have A moving to C, again, you have the same situation, or A moving to D. And I mean, there's so many other combinations that you can get, but the only combination that works is A, and it would move to B. So the answer would be, A. You could increase production of consumer goods without foregoing production of capital goods. Main economic objectives. So this was the question I was talking about before. So the main economic objective of firms now, this is what changes the question, is most likely to be maximisation of profits. Now, they might do that by achieving economies of scale because that would lower their average costs. They might do it through maximising consumer satisfaction because that should increase demand for their products. The achievement of an efficient allocation of resources is more the aim of the free market economics rather than the firm themselves. But maximisation of profit, that's why most firms exist. Price elasticity of demand for a good made by a firm is minus 0.6. If the firm raises the price of the good, the revenues will. So what do we know about this? Well, it's negative, which is what we'd expect for PED because demand is sloping downwards, and it begins with a 0, so it is inelastic. There we go. So it's good to write notes while you're doing this. So it's inelastic, and we know that if the price increases for a product that is inelastic, we know if price increases when it's inelastic, we know that revenue will increase. So it's going to be A. Lots of students said either fall by more than 6% or fall by less than 6%, which is incorrect. You wouldn't be able to work this out unless you had the amount by which the price had actually risen. So don't be just kind of fooled because it's giving you a lot of information there and it seems very specific, but it's actually rise. Okay, the government, this one was a hard one for students. The government is considering these 4 possible options. Which should it adopt? So basically you have to add up the benefits and minus out the costs. So the benefits of the new hospital would be 40 add 140, which would be 180, minus 140. So we've got 40 for the hospital, okay? So I'm just going to write that there, and I might rub out some of this because I need some more space here. Okay. And the new road is going to be 180 minus out 120. So we're going to see that being 60. Sorry, slow maths there. So, I can't rub that out now. So, new school is 110 minus the costs, which is 40, which is going to leave you with 70. Okay, so that's the winner at the moment. And then the new airport, I'm guessing, is not going to win. You can just kind of tell sometimes by this one, but don't just judge it on what the projects are because, they could just put some random ones in, but airports are always the example that we give when we're looking at negative externalities. But there are also positive externalities, but okay, so the benefits, 250, positive externalities there, as you can see, the external benefits, but the costs are going to be 260, so we're getting to minus 10. So it is new schools that's going to win, which I found funny actually when I saw this question, because obviously AQA, who set these questions, have a vested interest in more schools being built and expansion of these types of things, and people that work for AQA are educators as well, so they definitely believe in new schools and all those types of things. But most people put actually new hospitals, and I think that is because they just did private benefits minus private costs. So just be careful with that one. So looking at market failure, remember market failure is when you get overconsumption or underconsumption or a missing market, and it's allocatively inefficient or productively inefficient. So an increase in a firm's profits resulting from excess demand, that's not market failure, that's a good thing for the firm, maybe not so much for the consumer because they're facing higher prices, but it's not market failure, it's just the market functioning. Government intervention is not market failure, it's how the government try to solve the problem of market failure, so it doesn't class as a market failure. Increasing diseconomies of scale as a firm increases production, that's going to move them away from a point that's productively efficient. But it's more of an unfortunate thing for the firm. It's not so much what we'd class as a market failure. But inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth would be your market failure here. Because this would be thought of as being allocatively inefficient. So some people will not be able to access the things, basic human needs and basic human services, healthcare, education, transportation, food, those types of things, if there's too vast a difference in people's incomes. The government is concerned that the economy is not achieving productive efficiency. Whenever you see that word, it should trigger some things in your mind. So I always think of production possibility frontiers or production possibility curves when I think of productive efficiency. So you can see there, first answer, move the economy to a point on its production possibility frontier, which we know anywhere along the curve is productively efficient because you're maximising the output from the inputs that you have. B is actually trying to maximise allocative efficiency. C would be, I suppose, I don't know what type of policy that would be, because in the second year course you're going to learn about how profits can actually be really beneficial to the market. I suppose that might be a distributional issue there, and encourage all firms to expand. Yeah, I mean, that will increase your total output in your economy, but we're actually looking at how productive, how efficient you are at producing, rather than just increasing the actual total output. So it's A that's the answer.